The first time I noticed him was at the funeral. Amanda's mother had just passed, and the small, rain-soaked chapel was packed with grieving family members and old friends paying their respects. But he wasn't any of those. I was sure of it. He stood at the back, lingering near the door, his suit too sharp, his demeanor too calm for a man mourning a loss. His gaze wasn't on the casket or the priest, though. It was fixed squarely on Amanda. I thought I was imagining things at first. Grief does that to people, makes you paranoid, spins ordinary things into conspiracies. But then he did something that snapped me out of my daze. When Amanda turned her head slightly, as if sensing his presence, he nodded at her. Just a small, almost imperceptible movement, but it was enough. Amanda quickly looked away, her face pale and drawn. And in that split second, something shifted inside me. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. When it was over, I stood beside Amanda as the procession filed out. She barely spoke, only nodding numbly as well-wishers offered their condolences. I kept my eyes on the door, waiting to catch another glimpse of him. But he was gone. Back at the house, things felt heavy, like the air itself was grieving. Amanda's father had retreated to his study with a bottle of scotch, and the girls were quietly watching a movie in their room. I found Amanda in the kitchen, staring out the window, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "That man at the funeral," I said, leaning against the counter. "Who was he?" Her fingers tensed slightly around the mug, but she didn't turn around. "What man?" "The one in the back. Tall, dark suit. Looked like he didn't belong there." She shrugged, still not looking at me. "I didn't notice anyone." That was a lie. I could tell by the way her shoulders stiffened. Amanda wasn't a liar by nature, at least, I didn't think she was, but she wasn't good at it either. "You're sure?" I pressed. Finally, she turned to face me. Her eyes were red from crying, her face a mask of exhaustion. "Kevin, I've been burying my mother. I wasn't exactly taking roll call." Her tone was sharp, defensive. It wasn't like her, but I decided to let it go. This wasn't the time to push, no matter how much the unanswered question gnawed at me. A few days later, I saw him again. I was in the garage, tinkering with the lawnmower, when I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. I wiped my hands on a rag and stepped outside just in time to see a black sedan parked on the curb. The driver? Him. He was leaning against the car, his arms crossed, his eyes scanning the house. I froze, gripping the rag tighter in my hand. He hadn't seen me yet. My first instinct was to march over and demand to know who the hell he was and why he kept appearing. But something stopped me. Instead, I stayed in the shadows, watching. After a moment, the front door opened, and Amanda stepped out. She didn't notice me either. She walked toward him quickly, her head low, her hands stuffed into her pockets. She glanced around nervously before stopping a few feet away from him. They spoke in hushed tones. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I didn't need to. The tension between them was palpable. At one point, he reached out as if to touch her arm, but she stepped back, shaking her head. My stomach twisted. There was something intimate about the way they interacted, like two people who shared a secret too big to contain. After a few minutes, she turned and hurried back into the house without so much as a glance over her shoulder. The man stayed for a moment longer, staring after her, then got back into his car and drove away. I stood there in the garage, my heart pounding, questions swirling in my mind. Who was he? Why was Amanda meeting him like that? And why the hell didn't she tell me about it? Something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones. And I was going to find out what it was. When Amanda came back inside after meeting the man in the driveway, her face was pale, but her expression was carefully neutral, too neutral. It was the kind of look you wear when you've rehearsed it in your head, determined not to give anything away. She walked straight to the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water, her hands steady, her movements deliberate. She didn't see me watching her from the garage doorway. I didn't ask her anything immediately. If I learned one thing in my years working with clients who loved to sidestep tough questions, it was that timing was everything. You don't charge in and demand answers, you wait until the other person is off balance. And Amanda, despite her controlled exterior, wasn't as steady as she wanted to appear. That night, after the kids were asleep, I brought it up. We were lying in bed, her back to me, scrolling through her tablet like she always did before going to sleep. I was staring at the ceiling, trying to find the right way to start. Direct? Casual? Angry? In the end, I just said it. Who was the guy in the driveway? Amanda's scrolling finger froze for a split second before continuing. What guy? She said without turning around. I sat up. The one who pulled up earlier. You went outside to talk to him. She didn't look at me, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. It was no one. Just someone dropping something off. What did they drop off? Her hesitation was barely noticeable, but I caught it. A folder. Legal stuff for Dad's estate. She was lying. Amanda wasn't an exceptional liar, and I'd lived with her long enough to know when something didn't add up. Her words were too quick, too neat, like she'd rehearsed them in her head a dozen times. Where's the folder? I asked. She sighed, finally putting down her tablet and rolling over to face me. I left it in the study. What's with the third degree, Kevin? It's been a long day. I didn't push it further, though every fiber of my being wanted to. Something wasn't right, but I knew better than to force it. I'd get nowhere if she clammed up completely. The next morning, Amanda left early to take the kids to a friend's birthday party. I stayed back, claiming I had some work to catch up on. As soon as the car pulled out of the driveway, I went straight to the study. There was no folder. I searched everywhere, her desk, the bookshelves, the cabinets, but it wasn't there. If she had it, she was keeping it somewhere else. And if she was keeping it somewhere else, that meant it was important enough to hide. My mind was racing now. Who was that man? He wasn't just some random person delivering estate paperwork. His body language with Amanda, the way they stood so close but kept glancing around, it wasn't professional. It was personal. I didn't have proof of anything yet, but my gut was screaming at me that this wasn't a one-time interaction. This was something bigger, something ongoing. Around noon, while Amanda was still out, I decided to test a theory. Our next-door neighbor, Martha, was a retired nurse with a penchant for gossip. She spent most of her time gardening in the front yard, and nothing happened in the neighborhood without her knowing about it. If this man had been here before, she'd have noticed. Sure enough, Martha was out front, pruning her hydrangeas. I strolled over, trying to appear casual. Hey, Martha, I said. Beautiful day, huh? She looked up and smiled. Kevin. You're home today. That's a surprise. Yeah, needed to catch up on a few things, I replied, leaning against the fence. Hey, quick question for you. Did you see the car that was parked in our driveway yesterday evening? Black sedan? Martha's face lit up with curiosity. Oh, yes. I saw it. Nice car. The driver came around the same time last week, too. Handsome young man, very polite. My stomach dropped. Last week? She nodded. It was Thursday, I think. He was here for a while. I assumed he was one of Amanda's friends. Did you happen to catch what he was doing? I asked, trying to keep my tone light. Martha shrugged. Not really. I was trimming the roses out front. But I did notice they were talking out back for a bit. I didn't want to pry. Out back. Where the garden camera was. Thanks, Martha, I said, forcing a smile. I appreciate it. As I walked back to the house, my mind was spinning. I'd installed a security camera in the backyard years ago after a string of break-ins in the neighborhood. It was motion-activated and backed up footage to a cloud account. I hadn't checked it in ages, but if this man had been here before, there was a chance I had proof. Back inside, I logged into the camera system. The interface was clunky, and it took me a while to navigate to the right dates. My hands were shaking slightly as I clicked through the recordings. Most of the clips were just birds or squirrels triggering the motion sensor. But then I found it, Thursday, 4:47 p.m. The video started with Amanda walking out to the garden. A minute later, the black sedan pulled up. The man stepped out, looking just as polished and composed as he had at the funeral. Amanda met him halfway across the yard. Their conversation was muted by the distance, but their body language told me everything I needed to know. The way he leaned in when he spoke. The way she touched her hair nervously, something she only did when she was uncomfortable or lying. At one point, he handed her something, a folder, maybe, and she clutched it to her chest like it was a lifeline. The interaction lasted about 10 minutes before he got back in his car and drove away. Amanda stood there for a moment, staring at the spot where he'd been, before walking back inside. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. I didn't have the full picture yet, but it was enough to confirm my worst fears. Amanda was hiding something from me, and this man, whoever he was at the center of it. When Amanda came home that afternoon, I was waiting for her in the living room. I didn't say anything right away, just watched as she bustled around, unloading the kids and chatting like everything was perfectly normal. It wasn't. Finally, when the girls were upstairs, I spoke. "We need to talk." Her smile faltered, and she set down the bag she was holding. "About what?" "The man in the driveway. And why he's been here twice in the last week." Her face went pale, but she recovered quickly. "Kevin, I told you." "Don't lie to me," I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. "I know he's been here before. I have footage from the garden camera. So, tell me the truth, Amanda. Who is he?" She hesitated, her eyes darting toward the stairs, as if hoping one of the kids would come down and interrupt us. When they didn't, she sighed, her shoulders slumping. "He's just a friend," she said quietly. "What kind of friend?" I demanded. The silence that followed was deafening. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't ready for the answer. Her answer hung in the air, and I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me. Amanda looked cornered, and for a moment, I thought she might break. She always hated confrontations, especially when there was no easy escape. But she didn't confess. Instead, she deflected. "Kevin, this isn't the time," she said, her voice low, but her words carried the sharp edge of frustration. "The girls are upstairs. Do you really want them hearing us argue about some nonsense?" "This isn't nonsense," I said, my tone hard. "You're meeting a man in the middle of the night. He's been here more than once, and you're lying to me about who he is. So, yeah, I want to talk about it now." She folded her arms across her chest and glared at me. "Fine," she snapped. "If you want to know, his name is Daniel. He's an old friend from college. His wife died a few months ago, and he's been struggling. I've been helping him." I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. It sounded plausible, almost reasonable. But it didn't explain the secrecy, the way she flinched when I brought it up, or the lies she'd already told. "And you didn't think to tell me about him?" I asked. "I didn't think it was a big deal," she said, her voice softening. "He needed someone to talk to, and I thought I could help. That's all." "Help him with what?" I pressed. "And why the hell is he meeting you here, instead of calling or texting like a normal friend?" She hesitated, and that split second of silence told me everything I needed to know. There was more to this story, and she wasn't ready to share it. But I wasn't going to let her off the hook that easily. "Let me guess," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "This is about your mother's funeral too, right? He's here to comfort you because you're grieving?" Her expression hardened, and she opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off. "Save it, Amanda. I saw the way you looked at him. Whatever this is, it's not just about your mom, and it's sure as hell not just about helping some old friend. So, stop lying to me." Her eyes flashed with anger, and for a moment, I thought she might explode. But instead, she took a deep breath, her jaw tightening. "You're right," she said finally. "It's not just about my mom. Amanda sat down on the edge of the couch, avoiding my gaze. She looked exhausted, like the fight had drained whatever energy she had left. Daniel and I reconnected a few months ago, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He reached out after his wife passed away. We started talking, and it just happened. What happened? I demanded, though I already knew the answer. We got close, she admitted. Too close. But it's not what you think. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Not what I think. Amanda, you've been sneaking around with some guy, lying to me about it, and meeting him in the middle of the night. So, please, enlighten me, what am I supposed to think? She flinched at my tone, but I didn't care. This wasn't the time for tiptoeing around her feelings. I wanted answers, and I wanted them now. It's not physical, she said quickly. I swear, Kevin. We never. Don't, I snapped. Don't you dare try to downplay this. Whether it's physical or not, you've been hiding this from me. You've been lying to me, Amanda. Do you have any idea how that feels? Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might start crying. But she didn't. Instead, she squared her shoulders and looked me in the eye. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't plan any of it. But when my mom got sick, and you were so busy with work, I just felt so alone. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. So, what? You decided to replace me? It wasn't like that, she said quickly. I didn't go looking for it, Kevin. I just needed someone to talk to. Someone who understood. Understood what? I asked, my voice rising. What exactly did he understand that I didn't? Her silence was deafening. I could see the guilt written all over her face, but she didn't answer. And in that moment, I realized the truth. It didn't matter what excuses she gave me. She'd chosen him over me, and no amount of justification could change that. That night, after Amanda went to bed, I stayed up, replaying everything in my head. Her words, her lies, the man in the driveway, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't quite put together. I knew there was more to the story, and I wasn't going to let it go until I had the full picture. I logged back into the security camera system and started combing through the footage again. This time, I went back further, checking the last 3 months for any signs of Daniel. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. There were at least half a dozen clips of him coming to the house, always when I wasn't home. Sometimes he stayed for a few minutes, other times for over an hour. And in every clip, Amanda was the one who met him outside. They always talked in hushed tones, their body language tense but intimate. I saved the footage to my laptop and stared at the screen, my hands trembling with rage. This wasn't just some casual friendship. This was calculated, deliberate. They were hiding something big. The next morning, I didn't wait for Amanda to bring it up. As soon as the kids were out of the house, I confronted her again. I found the footage, I said, holding up my laptop. Care to explain? Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked genuinely terrified. Kevin, I told you. Don't lie to me, I said, my voice shaking. I have proof, Amanda. He's been here multiple times. You've been meeting him behind my back for months. So, tell me the truth. All of it. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, she sank down onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. I don't know what you want me to say, she whispered. I want the truth, I said. Not half of it, not some sanitized version that makes you look good. I want the whole damn story. And that's when she broke. Fine, she said, her voice trembling. You want the truth? Here it is, I didn't just reconnect with Daniel. I went to him. I needed someone, and he was there. He listened. He made me feel seen. Her words cut deep, but I didn't let her see how much they hurt. And what about me? I asked. Was I invisible? Did I not count? You were never here, she said, her voice rising. You were always at work, always too busy to notice what was happening right in front of you. Do you have any idea how hard it's been, Kevin? To lose my mom, to deal with everything on my own? And you think that justifies this? I shot back. Sneaking around, lying to me? You could have come to me, Amanda. You could have talked to me. She looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. I tried. But you didn't listen. Her words echoed in my mind as I left the house, slamming the door behind me. I needed air, space, anything to clear my head. But no matter how far I walked, the anger, the betrayal, and the pain followed me. The argument was loud enough to shake the walls. The girls were upstairs, probably trying to drown out the sound with their headphones, but I wasn't holding back anymore. The polite pretense Amanda and I had maintained for months had shattered. She couldn't run, couldn't redirect. The truth was a corner she was backed into, and I wasn't letting her out until every piece of it was on the table. It started earlier that evening when I saw Amanda step out of the house again, just like the night of the rainstorm. Only this time, there was no subtlety. She left in broad daylight, no excuses or fabricated errands. The kids were home, but she barely said a word to them before heading for the driveway. I followed her, not immediately, but close enough to keep her in sight. My stomach churned as I tailed her down the suburban streets, careful not to get too close. Her car eventually pulled into a small cafe on the other side of town. Not our usual spot or even the kind of place she'd normally go. From my parked car, I watched her step inside. A moment later, Daniel arrived. He walked in like he owned the place, scanning the room briefly before heading to Amanda's table. She smiled when she saw him, not the polite smile she'd been giving me for weeks, but something softer. Familiar. Intimate. I stayed in the car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. My first instinct was to march inside and confront them both right there, but I forced myself to wait. I needed to know more. Amanda leaned forward as they talked, her hands occasionally brushing his. At one point, Daniel reached into his bag and slid something across the table, a small, leather-bound notebook. She opened it, scanning the pages quickly, her expression unreadable. Whatever it was, it mattered. After nearly an hour, Daniel stood up, said something that made Amanda laugh, and left. She stayed behind for a few minutes, sipping her coffee and staring out the window like she was lost in thought. I used that time to write down Daniel's license plate number before heading home. By the time Amanda got back, I was waiting for her in the kitchen. She walked in, her steps hesitant when she saw me leaning against the counter, arms crossed. "Where were you?" I asked, keeping my tone as even as I could. "Out," she replied, her voice clipped. "I needed some air." "Try again," I said, stepping closer. "I followed you, Amanda. I saw you with him." Her face went pale, and for a moment, I thought she might deny it. But instead, she sighed, setting her purse down on the table. "Kevin, I don't have the energy for this right now." "You don't have the energy? That's your excuse?" I shot back. "You've been sneaking around with this guy for months, lying to my face, and you think you can just brush it off?" "It's not what you think," she said, her voice rising. "It's complicated." "Then uncomplicate it," I demanded. "Who is he, Amanda? What does he want from you?" She hesitated, her jaw tightening. "He's just someone who understands what I'm going through." "What you're going through?" I echoed, my anger boiling over. "Amanda, I'm your husband. I've been here every step of the way. Or did that stop mattering when you decided to turn to him?" Her eyes flashed with anger, but there was something else beneath it, guilt. "You don't understand, Kevin," she said. "You've been so busy with work, with everything else. I needed someone who was actually there for me." "Don't give me that bullshit," I snapped. "You didn't need someone. You wanted him. So, stop pretending this is my fault." For a moment, neither of us said anything. The silence was suffocating, the air thick with unspoken words. Finally, Amanda sat down at the table, burying her face in her hands. "It started after Mom got sick," she said quietly. Daniel was there. He helped me with the paperwork, the hospital visits. He made things easier. And what about now? I asked, my voice cold. What's he helping you with now? Her shoulders slumped, and she shook her head. I don't know, she admitted. It just happened. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Go how far? I demanded. Did you sleep with him? No, she said quickly, looking up at me with wide eyes. I swear, Kevin. It's not physical. It's just. Just what? I interrupted. Emotional? Amanda, that's worse. She flinched at my words but didn't argue. Instead, she stared at the table, her expression a mix of shame and defeat. I didn't know how to tell you, she said finally. I didn't want to hurt you. You didn't want to hurt me? I repeated, my voice rising. You're cheating on me, Amanda. You've been lying to me for months. Do you even hear yourself? I'm sorry, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Sorry isn't enough, I said. Not this time. Her confession wasn't enough for me. I needed to know exactly how far this went. What else she was hiding. So, I told her. We're not done here, Amanda. I'm getting answers. All of them. What are you talking about? She asked, her voice trembling. I hired a private investigator, I said, watching her reaction carefully. He's been looking into you and Daniel. And now, I have the full picture. Her face went white. You, what? I know about the emails, the calls, the meetings, I continued. I know about the notebook he gave you today. So, either you start talking, or I do. Amanda stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to find the words. But nothing came out. Finally, she stood up, her hands clenched into fists. You had no right. No right? I cut her off. You gave up your right to privacy the second you decided to betray me. Now, sit down and tell me the truth, or I swear to God, Amanda, this marriage is over. For the next hour, she told me everything. How Daniel had been a friend from college, someone she'd reconnected with after her mom's diagnosis. How their relationship had started as innocent support but had grown into something she couldn't control. She insisted it wasn't physical, that they'd never crossed that line, but I wasn't sure I believed her. I don't know what you want me to do, she said finally, her voice hoarse. I've told you everything. What I want, I said, my voice steady, is for you to leave. Pack a bag and go stay with your parents. I need space, Amanda. And so do the kids. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't argue. Instead, she nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Okay, she whispered. I'll go. As she walked upstairs to pack, I sat down at the table, staring at the empty notebook she'd left behind. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Amanda left the house that night without saying much. She packed a single suitcase, muttered something about needing to clear her head, and walked out the door. The silence she left behind was deafening, but I wasn't interested in finding peace. I was interested in finding the truth and in deciding what the hell came next for me, for our daughters, and for the wreckage she'd left behind. The house felt emptier than ever. Maddie and Chloe knew something was wrong, but I wasn't ready to tell them everything. Mom needed to spend some time with Grandma. I lied when Maddie asked why Amanda wasn't around. Chloe didn't even ask. She'd inherited my tendency to shut down when things got uncomfortable. I spent most of the next few days poring over the evidence I'd gathered, trying to decide how to approach the inevitable fallout. The private investigator's final report came in that week, and it confirmed what I already knew. Amanda and Daniel hadn't just been meeting up occasionally, they'd been in regular contact for months. Emails, late-night phone calls, even video chats when I was out of town. The emotional intimacy they shared was undeniable, and while there wasn't proof of anything physical, it didn't matter. She'd crossed a line that couldn't be undone. What stung the most wasn't just the betrayal, it was the deliberate, calculated nature of it all. Amanda hadn't stumbled into this relationship. She'd nurtured it, let it grow, and kept it hidden from me. 4 months, she'd built a life I wasn't a part of. That wasn't something I could forgive, no matter how many times she cried or apologized. On a cold Friday morning, Amanda called and asked to meet. "We need to talk," she said. Her voice was hoarse, like she hadn't slept in days. I agreed to meet her at a neutral place, a small park near her parents' house. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting on a bench by the lake. She looked smaller than I remembered, like the weight of the past week had crushed her spirit. But I wasn't there to pity her. I was there to end this. "Kevin," she said as I approached, her voice cracking. "Thank you for coming." I didn't respond right away, choosing to sit down beside her instead. I stared at the water, waiting for her to speak. Finally, she broke the silence. "I'm sorry," she said. "For everything." I nodded, but my expression didn't soften. "You're going to have to do better than that, Amanda." She took a shaky breath, clutching her hands together like they were the only thing holding her together. "I don't know how to explain it," she admitted. "It just happened." "Nothing just happens," I shot back. "You made choices, Amanda. Over and over again, you chose him. Not me. Not us. Him." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "You weren't there, Kevin. You were always working, always traveling. I felt invisible. So, you replaced me," I said bluntly. "Instead of talking to me, instead of trying to fix things, you decided to go behind my back and build a whole other relationship. Do you even realize what you've done to me? To our family?" She flinched at my words, but I didn't stop. "Do you think the girls won't notice? Do you think they'll just forget that their mom abandoned them to chase after some guy?" "I didn't abandon them," she protested. "I love them." "Do you?" I interrupted. "Because right now, it doesn't look like it." Amanda fell silent, tears streaming down her face. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But the damage she'd done was too great to ignore. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said after a long pause. "When I started talking to Daniel, it was just easy. He understood what I was going through." "And I didn't?" I asked, my voice cold. "Amanda, I was right there. All you had to do was talk to me." "You were always busy," she said quietly. "I didn't want to bother you." "That's not an excuse," I snapped. "You're my wife. We're supposed to handle things together. But instead, you shut me out." She wiped her face with the sleeve of her jacket, looking more defeated than I'd ever seen her. "I know I messed up," she said. "I know I hurt you. But I want to fix this, Kevin. Please. For the girls." "Fix it?" I repeated, incredulous. "Amanda, this isn't something you can just fix. You destroyed our marriage. You lied to me. You betrayed me. How do you come back from that?" She didn't answer, and I could see the realization sinking in. She'd pushed me too far, and there was no way to undo what she'd done. After what felt like hours of silence, I finally spoke. "Here's what's going to happen," I said. "I've already contacted a lawyer. We're getting divorced." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. "Kevin, no. I'm not changing my mind," I said firmly. "You made your choice, Amanda. Now I'm making mine." "But the girls." "The girls will be fine," I said. "I'll make sure of it. But they deserve better than this. They deserve better than a marriage built on lies." She opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. "I'm not doing this for me, Amanda. I'm doing this for them. Because the example you've set isn't one I want them to follow." Her shoulders slumped, and she looked away, defeated. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Then don't say anything," I said. "Just sign the papers when they come." As I stood up to leave, Amanda reached for my hand. "Kevin, please," she said, her voice trembling. "I still love you. I pulled my hand away, shaking my head. No, Amanda. You love the idea of me. But love doesn't look like this. Not anymore. Without another word, I walked away, leaving her sitting alone by the lake. The weight of what had happened lingered, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of clarity. This wasn't the ending I'd imagined for us, but it was the only one that made sense. Amanda's departure was final. She signed the divorce papers 2 weeks after our conversation, and by the end of the month, we were officially separated. The house, once filled with the routines of family life, felt quieter, almost sterile. The absence of her presence, though heavy at first, became a space I grew to appreciate. I wasn't moving on just yet, but I was preparing to. The most pressing priority was Maddie and Chloe. They were old enough to notice the changes but young enough to need reassurance. After Amanda left, I decided the best way forward was honesty, age-appropriate, but direct. I sat them down in the living room on a Saturday morning. They sat across from me, their expressions wary. Maddie, the older of the two, was the first to speak. "Is Mom coming back?" she asked, her voice trembling. "No," I said firmly but gently. "Your mom and I have decided to live separately. We're not going to be married anymore." Chloe frowned, her lower lip trembling. "Why? Did we do something wrong?" "No, sweetheart," I said, leaning forward to meet her eyes. "This has nothing to do with you or Maddie. Your mom and I, we just have differences we can't work out." It was a simplified version of the truth, but it was enough for now. Maddie, ever perceptive, didn't look convinced. "Is this because of that guy Mom keeps talking to?" I froze, caught off guard by her bluntness. "What do you mean?" "I heard her on the phone once," Maddie said, her voice quiet. "She was talking to a man. She said he made her feel better." Chloe's eyes widened, but I stayed calm. "That's between your mom and me," I said carefully. "But you need to know that none of this is your fault. We both love you very much." They nodded, though I could see the uncertainty lingering in their expressions. I knew this conversation wasn't the end of their questions, but it was a start. With Amanda gone, I threw myself into creating a sense of normalcy for the girls. I adjusted my work schedule to be home more often, started cooking meals instead of relying on takeout, and made sure I was present for every school event, soccer practice, and bedtime routine. It wasn't easy. There were nights I sat at the kitchen table, exhausted and questioning everything, but I knew I couldn't afford to falter. One evening, Maddie asked if we could watch a movie together. It was something we hadn't done in months, and the request caught me off guard. We ended up on the couch, a big bowl of popcorn between us, laughing at a cheesy comedy. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we'd get through this. Amanda and I agreed on a co-parenting arrangement. The girls would stay with me during the week and visit her on weekends. The handoffs were civil, but cold. Amanda made an effort to act cheerful around the girls, but the tension between us was impossible to ignore. One Friday evening, when Amanda came to pick up the girls, Maddie hesitated. "Do we have to go?" she asked, glancing at me. "It's your mom's weekend," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "You'll have fun." Amanda stepped forward, her smile faltering. "Maddie, is something wrong?" Maddie shrugged, her expression guarded. "It's just weird." Amanda looked at me, her eyes pleading for help, but I stayed silent. This was her mess to navigate, not mine. It wasn't until a month after the separation that Amanda called me out of the blue. Her voice was hesitant, almost apologetic. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Without the girls around?" I agreed, though I wasn't sure what she expected to achieve. We met at a coffee shop, neutral ground where emotions couldn't run too high. She looked tired, her once polished demeanor frayed around the edges. "I wanted to thank you," she began, stirring her coffee absently. "For keeping things civil. For being there for the girls." "They're my daughters," I said flatly. "That's my job." She flinched but pressed on. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About what I did. And I want you to know. I'm sorry." I leaned back, crossing my arms. Sorry for what, Amanda? For lying? For cheating? For destroying our family? Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't let up. You didn't just hurt me, Amanda. You hurt them. Maddie doesn't even want to go to your house. Chloe keeps asking if she did something wrong. So, forgive me if I'm not moved by your apology. I know, she whispered, her voice breaking. I know I messed up. But I want to fix things. You don't get to fix things, I said coldly. Not anymore. You made your choices. Now, you live with them. The weeks turned into months, and slowly, I started to rebuild. I found solace in routines, work, parenting, and the occasional night out with friends. My colleagues, who had always seen me as the steady, reliable one, were surprised by the sharp edge in my demeanor. I wasn't the same man I'd been before Amanda's betrayal, and I didn't want to be. Therapy became a lifeline. At first, I was hesitant. Talking to a stranger about my private life felt unnatural, but my therapist was patient. She helped me untangle the anger, the guilt, and the lingering sense of failure. You're allowed to grieve, she said one session. But you're also allowed to move forward. By the time summer rolled around, I felt like I was finally finding my footing. Maddie and Chloe were thriving, their resilience a constant source of inspiration. We spent weekends hiking, visiting museums, and rediscovering what it meant to be a family. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, Maddie spoke up. Dad? Yeah? Do you think we'll ever all live together again? Like before? I paused, considering my words carefully. No, Maddie, I said gently. But that doesn't mean we're not a family. We're just different now. And that's okay. She nodded, her expression thoughtful. From what I heard through mutual acquaintances, Amanda and Daniel didn't last. The relationship that had seemed so important to her crumbled under the weight of reality. She started dating someone else a few months later, but by then, I didn't care. Her life was hers to figure out, just as mine was mine. Looking back, Amanda's betrayal was a turning point not just for our marriage, but for me as a person. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't painless, but it was necessary. The girls and I were stronger now, our bond unshakable. And as I tucked them into bed each night, I knew one thing for certain, we would be okay. No matter what came next, we'd face it together.